It's commonly believed that if you want to speak English well, you must stay or live in an English-speaking country. Do you want to speak English? Well, go to the United States or to the United Kingdom or something like that, and boom, you're good to go. Although I have to admit that staying in a foreign country is perhaps the best way to master a language because you can be exposed to the culture, to the people, to the community. It does not mean that you cannot learn a foreign language in your native country. In this video, I would like to walk you through some of my experiences and thoughts about learning English in my native country. I would explore ways to learn English from the perspective of a regular Chinese student who receives typical Mandarin education here in China. By doing this, one day you will probably find yourself pushing your envelope and speaking English fluently without even leaving your native country. So let's get into it. Starting from nothing, you need to make sure that you have sufficient input in English. One of the most predominant things to remember is that the textbooks you get from your middle school education are not efficient for you to readily master English. It is not that textbooks are not important because they contain very useful grammar and certain vocabulary, but they are made for the sake of testing and examination. I would say what textbooks offer is just not so efficient. If you hope to be a fluent speaker, you have to get your hands on way more than that. I highly suggest you opt for decent English materials. As the internet is still flourishing, you can get tons of materials taking different forms from different corners. If you're interested in standard English, you can choose to listen to NBC or CNN 10. These are my day-to-day English media to get decent spoken English and updates about the world. I suggest you go with subtitles in the first place. A lot of great English users are working so hard to make these news reports easier to use. Subtitles are also super important for beginners as they relieve difficulties for understanding, making the beginners feel more courageous and confident in English learning. On the other hand, if your interest goes to everyday English, podcasts will come in handy. Open language is my top recommendation for listening. For me, listening to this channel is fun as I could pick up a wide range of decent idioms and phrases. I've been following this channel for about 8 years, witnessing a few anchors come and go. I believe that this is a great channel for any regular Chinese students who wants to learn English in their native country. Life Kit, introduced by NPR, is another frequently accessed podcast of mine. I think conversation-based podcasts are a very great way to make you actively listen to English. You can imagine that you are one of the participants in the group, sharing and listening to the points and takeaways. I think these sorts of podcasts are very helpful for you to activate your ear, your mind, and your sense of English. But there are just so many English channels out there, TED Speeches and Newsbook Question, to name just a few. However, you need to just make sure that you follow just a few of them. Focus on certain channels and make listening a habit, and that's the way to go. Besides listening, reading is also a big part of English learning. But I think reading original English fictions and novels is not so friendly for beginners because these books could contain so many language nuances and culture implications, making them not easy to understand and read. If you're not reading with pleasure, if you're not reading with fun, your motivation will soon be subdued. With that in mind, I think online passages are very good to use. I remember that I started to browse Flipboard and Soccer News during high school, so the takeaway about reading I can give to beginners today is that you can find passages of your interest online. If you're a Lego fan, you can check out Lego News and Discussion. If you're into digital devices, The Verge and Phone Arenas and some other websites could be very good to use. If you're following celebrities, many related websites can come in handy. It is not that any given website could be the silver bullet for learning. Read passages as you like and also make it a habit. Always make sure to highlight and look up words and phrases that you do not know as you read. Number 2, intense learning must be carried out. Intense learning means to slowly and carefully listen and read. First of all, dictation is the best solution to improve listening. During dictation, you can actually help you identify certain grammar, pronunciation, or phrases that native speakers use but you did not know in the first place. Over time, dictation can help your ears more familiar with this in English. I recommend going for BBC 1-minute word news. I had tried dictation for over a year and it really made a difference to my listening capacity. So find your favorite way to do dictation and get set off today. Perhaps you need to keep a language diary. That is to say, think about using a collection to gather all the language points in a way that you can easily review and index. It could be a small notebook, a Quizlet collection, or something else. I think no one would deny the importance of reviewing to study. Now let's talk about intense reading. Materials for intense reading could vary, but I personally opt for magazines and college textbooks. The magazines I read often are Times Magazine and some other science materials. A wide suggestion is Economists, but I only read it for the purpose of testing because a lot of English tests and examinations are based on Economist articles. When the examination is over, I lose it. At the same time, college English textbooks are also very helpful. I went through the entire volume of advanced English, and I found that the learning process was super rewarding. Intense reading helps me to get a lot of language points, words, phrases, and sentence structure. I am also familiar with how the English passage is created and how the English language is different from the Chinese. I also noticed the logic and the way of articulating things in written language, so reading is very beneficial for an English learner. If you want to improve your English proficiency, you definitely need to know the importance of intense reading. You can get whatever you want, just go out there and look for the articles that suit your interests. If you find what you like to read, slowly and carefully read it, word by word, phrase by phrase, and make sure to highlight the language points that you have trouble with. Make sure to read these articles many times. For some of the passages you get, you can actually try reverse translation. That is to say, write down the English sentences based on Chinese translation. While you are increasing your input in English, it is time to speak out something. I would say speaking must go hand in hand with listening and reading. As you acquire fresh languages, you may need to put into use. How to put into use a foreign language in your native country, where people do not actually understand that language? My suggestion is that you can speak to the screen and speak to yourself. Speaking to the screen is what is called shadowing, which means that you speak as the speakers do. If you're new to it, try simple and slow materials like language learning channels and slow English news reports. Over time, as you find yourself more familiar with shadowing, you can actually try building up challenges like standard news reports.
The UN is attempting a further evacuation of civilians from the Ukrainian city of Mariupol.
Documentary.
In the French capital, the Red Cross is swamped. Belgian refugees are transferred to cattle cars heading south.
And even TV series.
Which is which? What? Did the Academy had you right out of the room? You guys get younger every... What'd you say to babyface, huh? Aren't you saying anything stupid?
At the same time, you can actually try to speak to yourself. Man, I do it a lot, being in English or in Chinese. I often create an audience in my mind to whom I shall describe or explain something. I share with them a story, my thoughts about a recent event, my feelings, and even I teach him something that I recently learned. I do it with or without people around. As long as I feel I'm not bothering someone around, I do it. I realized that I had such a tendency as early as I was in middle school. Actually, as I teach more children, I noticed that many of them have that habit. But as they grow up, many people seem to lose that habit, causing their ability to learn a language to decrease. I watched a psychologist analysis video saying that speaking to yourself is actually not a bad thing as long as what you speak to yourself is positive. That actually relieved my worry. Although speaking to yourself is a good way to practice English, you have to go out there and talk to someone else. Your partner can be one of your friends who also wants to speak English, but you better find a partner whose English level is similar to yours, because in this way you two can make the conversation between you two carried out more fluently. A lecture-style English corner on campus does not help, and you should not waste too much time on that. To make the matter even worse, an introvert person is more reluctant to speak in a group than in a two-person conversation. So 2 or 3 people can make a good English corner actually. Meanwhile, a test or a competition can give you a push. If your native community does not go with a very preferable English speaking environment, you can try to create that on your own. Maybe you can try a test. An IELTS test or a TOEFL test could be very useful. Or you can sign up for a competition, speech competition or writing competition. Under such a mandatory circumstance, you are likely to gain much more boost and motivation to use the English language, and they can be a decent opportunity to help you test your ability and spot your headroom and disadvantages of English. Alright, let's recap for the output session. After accumulating some English language in your mind, you may also need to speak out to yourself or speak out to the screen, which we call shadowing. You do not waste time on a group chat, particularly when you are not confident with your English or you do not think that you are an extrovert person. The best way to find a partner is to find a single person who would be also an English learner and could be a native speaker that you find online. On top of that, you also need to explore opportunities for English speaking. It could be an oral test, it could be a competition, it could be an activity. I hope by doing all of these, you can also be more confident in speaking out in English. So that's all for this sharing. If you have more tips and suggestions on English learning in your native country, please leave your comment down below. I will explore more perspectives on English learning in this channel, so stay tuned and see you next time.